What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's been a while since we did a zombies video, and I'm not really too amped about DLC 4. It's gonna be interesting to see what it is. I do got some theory videos coming out, but today I wanted to talk about Black Ops 2 and Black Ops 2 Buried. Now, I have been playing the ever-loving Dookie out of Black Ops 2. Hear me out, though. I lost my capture card, gonna have to get a new one, so I don't have any of my own Black Ops 2 gameplay. So I'm giving credit to Mr. Delic JD. I'm probably gonna throw some of his Black Ops 2 gameplay up on the screen, but let's talk about the story of Black Ops 2 Buried. Now, imagine waking up in the middle of an abandoned Wild West town, except there's only one problem. The entire town is buried hundreds of feet underground in the middle of Africa. Now, there's a giant man locked inside of a jail cell. A ghost is haunting a mansion, just running around there. The dead are walking through the dusty, dirty little streets of dirt. Somewhere beneath all of it is a machine powerful enough to determine the fate of the entire world. My friends, welcome to Buried. Now, Buried is the third and final chapter of the Victis storyline in Call of Duty Black Ops 2 Zombies, following the Transit and Die Rise maps. And while the map might look like a ridiculous combination of cowboys, zombies, ghosts, and this guy named Arthur, who's from the Middle Ages, believe it or not, the actual story is much darker, because the four survivors aren't simply trying to escape another zombie outbreak. They're being manipulated by two of the most powerful beings in the zombies universe, Edward Richtofen and Dr. Ludwig Maxis, if you will. And by the end of Buried, one of them will effectively win the war. But before we get into that, we need to understand how this strange town ended up buried underground in the first place. Boom. To understand Buried, we have to go back to the end of Black Ops 1. Now, on the moon, Ultimus Richtofen had finally completed his plan. He had switched bodies with Samantha Maxis and gained control over the zombies and the Aether. But the other three members of Ultimus, Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takio, refused to let him remain in control. They sided with the disembodied Dr. Maxis. Maxis instructed them to launch missiles at the Earth, and they did that. The missiles struck the planet, causing catastrophic destruction. Earth was fractured, civilization collapsed, and billions of people were either killed or turned into zombies. Now, but the destruction of Earth wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of the Victis saga. And in the ruins of the destroyed world, four survivors would eventually find themselves caught in the war they didn't even understand. Misty, Marlton, Russman, my boy, and Samuel Stuhlinger, the guy who eats the zombies' flesh. Together, they became known as the Transit Crew, or, as we know them, Victis. The Victis crew didn't exactly volunteer for this mission, this calling. In fact, they barely even understood what was happening, if they knew at all. I think the person that knew the most was probably Russman, because he did work for a secret agency, but somehow he lost his memory. Now, during transit, the group discovered that two mysterious voices were communicating with them. One belonged to Maxis, the other belonged to Richtofen. Both wanted Victis to complete tasks for them, and both promised the following. Following their instructions would eventually lead to salvation. The problem, however, Victis had no idea which one they could trust. This became the central conflict for the entire Black Ops 2 zombie storyline. Maxis versus Richtofen through this group of transit characters. Now, Maxis wanted to regain control of the Aether to reunite with his daughter Samantha. Richtofen wanted to maintain his control over the zombies. And Victis were basically the four unwilling people caught in the middle of this entire scenario. Now, during transit, Victis completed the first polarization device, and they ultimately sided with Maxis. Then came Die Rise. Richtofen once again manipulated the group through Stuhlinger into traveling to another location and demanded that they activate another device. Once again, Victis sided with Maxis. But after Die Rise, something strange happened. The voices disappeared. Victis were left wandering through the ruined world for 2 entire months. They traveled across the remains of Earth. Eventually, they reached a location in southern Angola, and that's where things got extremely weird. Now, the place Victis discovered is an old western town, but this isn't some ordinary abandoned settlement. The town originally existed in the 1800s. Its name is Purgatory Point in the game. At some point, however, something caused the town to be displaced through time and space. It was eventually transported beneath a mining facility in Angola, and that's how an entire Wild West town from America ended up inside a gigantic underground cabin. Now, the town essentially is frozen in time. You have the saloon, the bank, the church, the general store, the mansion, the jail, and inside the jail is one of the strangest characters in zombies history. It's a giant named Arthur, but most people call him Leroy. Arthur is trapped inside a cell, and when Victis eventually frees him, he becomes one of their most important allies. But Arthur himself has an insane story. Now, long before Buried takes place, Arthur was connected to an ancient warrior known as the Wolf King, right? Arthur served the Wolf King loyally, and we've seen this castle that the Wolf King belongs to in Der Eisendrache. Now, when the Wolf King died, Arthur buried his master's bones, but shortly afterward, Arthur himself was transported through a temporal rift. He eventually ended up inside the underground town, and somehow he ended up being imprisoned. By the time Victis arrives, Arthur has been trapped there for hundreds of, who knows how long. Maybe it was just a few seconds. But he isn't just a random NPC. He's essentially a relic from another time. His presence is another indication that the forces surrounding the zombie storyline have completely broken the normal rules of time and space. And this is important because Buried is full of evidence that the town isn't simply underground. It is effectively caught inside the aftermath of that dimensional chaos caused by the Aether. Now we can move on to the mansion inside Buried. Arthur isn't the only strange thing in Buried. That mansion is not like anything. First off, it's creepy. I hate going through the mansion contains one of the map's most disturbing stories. Inside the mansion, Victis encounters a ghost. She attacks the players, drains their points, and tries to kill them. But this isn't just a random supernatural entity, enemy, if you will. She was once a real woman. Mrs. Brown, what's her name? Her husband, Jebediah Brown, all my homies know who Jebediah is, was connected to the mine surrounding the Purgatory Point. Now, one day, a man named Clive wandered onto the Brown property. Miss Brown attempted to help him. Instead, Clive attacked her and tore out her throat. A neighbor eventually killed Clive, but it was already too late. Miss Brown died from her injuries. Jebediah was devastated. He buried his wife and hoped that she had gone to heaven, but then something happened. Jebediah entered the mine, and when he returned, time had changed. He had only been gone for just a few hours from his perspective, but multiple days had passed. Inside the mine, Jebediah encountered strange blue rocks, element 115 if you will, and eventually became convinced that mysterious beings were communicating with them. He believed they were angels. They instructed him to build a machine capable of increasing the power of weapons, and this machine would eventually become connected to something very familiar to the Zombies players, and that would be our very own Pack-a-Punch machine. Absolutely insane storytelling here on this map, Buried. Now, Jebediah Brown went mad. Jebediah continued following the instructions he believed were coming from the mysterious beings, but grief eventually consumed him. We also thought Jebediah Brown was the warden in Black Ops 7. I don't think that's the case anymore. It is what it is, but Jebediah Brown, I would love to see him come back and see his story play out, and not just from like text and logs and all that other kind of stuff. Grief eventually took over, right? And he couldn't accept that his wife was dead, so he did something absolutely horrifying. He dug up her corpse. He placed her body inside the Pack-a-Punch machine, and when he activated the machine, her body disappeared. Jebediah had no idea where it went, but when he returned home, he saw something. An apparition of his wife. She appeared younger, she wandered through the mansion, and she could even be seen playing the piano. Jebediah believed the strange blue rocks from the mine were driving the townspeople insane. But there was something much bigger happening. The mine was connected to forces far beyond human comprehension and understanding. Eventually, Jebediah was placed an Agarthan device into the Pack-a-Punch machine, and that device caused something absolutely incredible. The entire town ended up getting teleported. Purgatory Point was ripped from its original location and deposited inside a cavern beneath Angola. Now, the townspeople were eventually overwhelmed by the undead, and Miss Brown's ghost remained behind, forever trapped inside the mansion. And this is why the mansion exists in Buried. It's essentially a haunted piece of a town that has been ripped out of its own time. Now, the third polarization device. While Victis are exploring this bizarre underground town, Maxis and Richtofen do return. Both voices begin communicating with the survivors again, and once again, they want the same exact thing, the final polarization device. The previous two devices were constructed during transit in Dire Eyes. Buried continues a third final device, contains, and whoever controls it can potentially win the entire war, the entire internal conflict of these two entities inside the transit crew, or that are influencing the transit crew. Maxis wants Victis to activate it for him. Richtofen wants Victis to activate it for him. And this is where Buried's Easter egg becomes extremely important, because for the first time, Victis have a genuine choice. They could side with Maxis, or they could side with Richtofen. What are their plans? Let's talk about Richtofen's plan first. Well, he just wants to maintain control of the zombies. Remember that his consciousness is still connected to the Aether. He's in the MPD on the moon. Even though his original body is no longer where it once was, his soul continues influencing events. Now, Richtofen uses Stuhlinger as his primary connection to Victis because Samuel had consumed zombies' flesh. Because of that, he can hear Richtofen. The other members of Victis don't experience this connection in the same way. So Stuhlinger becomes the center of the conflict. Richtofen constantly manipulates him, threatens him, and gives him instructions. He uses his knowledge of Stuhlinger's fear to control him. Richtofen wants Victis to build the final device for him, and if they succeed, he believes he can finally secure his position, but Maxis has his own plans. This is one of the most important parts of Buried's story. Maxis is the hero. All right. Throughout Transit and Dire Eyes, Maxis can almost appear to be the good guy. He claims that Richtofen is evil. He promises to save Victis. He promises to reunite with Samantha. And he constantly tells the survivors that Richtofen is manipulating them. But by Buried, we discover that Maxis isn't exactly a hero either. Maxis has become corrupted by the Dark Aether. His obsession with finding Samantha has completely consumed him, and he does not care about the consequences anymore. He just wants Samantha back, his daughter. And he's willing to sacrifice almost everything to accomplish it. This becomes painfully obvious if Victis completes Maxis' side of the Easter egg. It is painstakingly obvious. Now, the mind games. Easter egg is called Mind Games, and the name is extremely fitting because Victis are essentially playing a game designed by two beings who are manipulating them from behind the scenes. What is the fate of Richtofen? Maxis now has enough power to strike back at Richtofen, and he does. Richtofen's consciousness is ripped from the Aether, but Maxis doesn't simply destroy him. He does something much worse. He traps Richtofen's soul inside of a zombie, the legendary Edward Richtofen. And a zombie, the man who spent years trying to control the undead, is reduced to one of them. Now his soul is trapped inside the zombie. This creates the zombies community called the Undead Richtofen, and this is one of the most important moments in the entire Aether storyline because Richtofen is no longer the person controlling the zombies. He's now one of them, and Maxis has effectively won. That's what it looks like. Now, Samantha sees what her father has become, and being trapped in the Aether for years let her know this. She had already seen her father descend into madness, but now she witnesses something even worse. Maxis has become corrupted. He has become obsessed with finding her, and Samantha realizes that her father is no longer the person she remembers. This becomes one of the emotional turning points of the original zombie storyline. Samantha doesn't want this version of Maxis. She wants her father back, and that's why she reaches out across dimensions. She finds another version of her father, a version living in another reality, and this is where the story starts transitioning towards the events of later zombies maps like Origins. But here's where things get interesting. Buried has two possible endings. Victis can side with Maxis, or they can side with Richtofen. If they choose Richtofen, the situation changes. Instead of Maxis gaining control, Richtofen maintains his connection to the Aether. The game gives players an alternate outcome to the conflict, but this is where zombies gets a little complicated because while both endings are playable, they aren't equally important to the later storyline. The Maxis ending is one that ultimately carries forward. It's the one that has the most massive consequences because Maxis winning doesn't mean the world is safe. It means something much worse is coming. After Buried, the situation continues escalating. Victis eventually become involved in events surrounding the empty Earth and the future plans of Primus Richtofen. They're eventually used to obtain the Chronorium, and later their blood vials become important to the Primus storyline, but Victis' journey doesn't end with Buried. Their story eventually leads to events in Black Ops 4, and meanwhile, Maxis is still pursuing Samantha, the Earth is still and already broken, Aether is unstable, and Maxis has essentially gained control over the remaining pieces of the world. Eventually, Maxis makes the ultimate decision. He destroys Earth again. The world that Victis spent the entire Black Ops 2 storyline trying to survive is ultimately doomed anyways, and that's the real tragedy of Buried. Victis never actually saved the world. They were pawns. They were manipulated by Maxis. They were manipulated by Richtofen, and every time they thought they were getting closer to freedom, they were actually being pushed deeper into someone else's plans. Now, why does Buried matter, right? You've got a giant carrying candy, a haunted mansion, a Wild West town, a bank full of explosive, all that stuff. But underneath all of that is one of the most important chapters of the entire Aether story because Buried answers the question that Black Ops 2 has been asking since Transit. Who wins the war between Maxis and Richtofen? The answer is very simple. It's Maxis. But the victory is very, very hollow anyways. I mean, Maxis gets closer to Samantha, Richtofen is defeated, but Maxis himself becomes corrupted by the powers he gains. And the world ultimately pays the ultimate price to this. Buried also introduces one of the most important concepts in the zombie storyline, the idea that Victis are being manipulated across time and dimensions. Their actions in Buried don't simply affect their own survival. They eventually become important to Primus Richtofen's plans, where their blood becomes valuable, the Chronorium becomes important, and their existence becomes part of the larger multiversal war. It's what allows them to survive in Blood of the Dead, too. The Primus crew, not the Victis crew. Now, when you look back at Buried, it's not really the story of 4 survivors trapped in a zombie-infested Wild West town. It's a little bit more convoluted. They didn't understand the Aether. They didn't understand the Dark Aether. They didn't understand Richtofen. They didn't understand Maxis. And they certainly did not understand the war being fought around them. They're simply trying to survive. And unfortunately, survival was never really the goal. Maxis wanted his daughter. Richtofen wanted control. Samantha wanted her father back. And Victis, they just wanted to live. But in a world of zombies, that's apparently asking for far, far too much. And that, my friends, is the story of Buried, a Wild West forgotten town. A giant guy named Arthur from the Middle Ages, a haunted mansion, corrupted Dr. Maxis, a defeated Richtofen, 4 survivors caught unknowingly in the middle of a insane war, if you will. Don't even get me started on the the apothecans and all, like, oh my goodness. Absolutely insane. Guys, leave a like if you enjoy. I'll see you on the next one. Subscribe if you're brand new. And I'm out of here.